One day I was working on a pipeline that was the water main, and I could see our pipeline ripping straight through some koala habitat. The other horrible thing was we were hitting these shelves of asbestos, putting it all up into the air. We have these EPA laws that say, hey, you need to be 15 meters off this tree. It just seems like someone made up a number to make nature not be destroyed. You can't just rip through the middle of a forest and go, oh yeah, if we stay 15 meters away, the koalas will be fine. One night I remember sitting down with my mom. I was crying at the time. I was like, Mom, I don't know what to do. If we understand nature, we innately will appreciate it more. A tree wasn't growing because it wanted to show off. A tree was growing because it wanted to thrive and create systems of exchange and resilience. Nature is truth. If we partner with nature, then we're actually going to have all the tools that we need to fix the planet.
Welcome to the Life Rocks podcast. In this podcast, we explore how nature, science, education, and culture can benefit all children and future generations. This is a show for educators, parents, mentors, and anyone interested in making the lives of our children, families, and communities better. So sit back, take a breath, and enjoy the show. And now for your host, Asher Cloran.
Life Rocks listeners, you're here today with Asher. I'm the host, and this is Monty, the founder of Urban Botanica Collective, a diverse background in biophilic design, permaculture, engineering, and he's on a mission to educate and empower and bring people back to nature and do that in urban environments. Monty, welcome to the show.
Hey, Asher, how you going? Thanks for having me. Hello, listeners.
Going great today. Even better to have a like mind on the show where we get to discuss all of the big things that matter to us, like the disconnection between the natural world and the people of this world. It's happening more in cities, probably because people cut down the trees to put up the buildings. They put the pavement over the grass, and they forget that actually we came from this planet. And without nature around us, there's something in us that does wither away and die. When did this become obvious to you, and why do you make it your mission to fight to bring back nature to urban environments?
Wowza. What a great intro. Yeah, it's really interesting because, background-wise, I'm Indian, Fijian, Nepalese. So I'm from a completely different culture, brought up by completely different people. Also do have adopted grandparents who are Australian, and they adopted our family from Fiji. So I actually got the beautiful kind of world of having this really traditional Indian upbringing, but then also had these Australian super amazing grandparents who are also avid gardeners. And so I'm the first generation here. And so for us, we've come from this other country of just farming for generations, and then landed in this new fertile soil back in maybe the 1990s. And we've gone, all right, well, let's make a living here. And so I very much went through a very traditional lifestyle. Like, parents are Asian, so they're like, you got to get a degree, you got to study, you got to go follow this thing, you need to set yourself up for the future. So I listened to them.
Get a good job.
So it's really, especially through early childcare to late high school, I really was quite disconnected from those spaces. I really didn't thrive. Also because inherently, being a brown kid in a school of 1,200 people, and me and my brother probably the only two brown people generally there, you're a very easy target as well. So I actually really didn't enjoy school for that reason. But the places I really did thrive was in physics, engineering, biology, art, design and tech, all these like really creative kind of pursuits. Anything that because I'm like semi-dyslexic, not completely diagnosed, but I can pick up on those traits and see when my brain actually really has troubles comprehending.
Where did you go to school, Monty? Where?
Yeah, that was in Newcastle.
Newcastle.
And no, bad talk on them. They really did try to support me and get me through the education system. But yeah, look, it was a weird time and a weird transitional space, and it's definitely made me a much stronger person today. I still am very much involved. As we get more into the podcast, we'll talk a bit more about, I guess, my involvement in it. But I was like, all right, I guess I'll go do a degree. And so I've got my bachelor's in industrial design. And so industrial design is a pretty interesting field because you're not a full-fledged like engineer, and you're not this like technical powerhouse of mass crunching. You're like a creative engineer. So you're really looking at a problem, and then you're like trying to understand what is the problem at its grassroots. How is a human interacting with that problem? How can I make it safe and ergonomic for them? Is it visually appealing? Like you go into color theory. If a button, we take all these things for granted, but everything around us has been designed. It's white and it's obvious that it's on. If it's pulsing yellow, it might be on standby mode. All these little things have been designed. And so I went for a traditional system, 4 years, prototyping and doing cool engineering stuff. I have 12 years in civil space and designing molds and flying drones and doing all different types of funky stuff. But I found into my mid 25, when I was like when I was 25, I found a really big disconnect between, cool, I'm doing all these fun projects, but at the core of who I am as a person, I don't feel fulfilled. I think there was just one day I was working on a pipeline that was going up to Barrington Tops, and it was a water main. And I was looking in on all the data, and I could just see our pipeline ripping straight through some koala habitat. The other horrible thing was that there was naturally occurring asbestos in the ground. And so we were hitting these shelves of asbestos, putting it all up into the air. And we have these EPA laws that say, hey, you need to be 15 meters off this tree. How does that? It just seems like someone made up a number to make nature not be destroyed. But when you do that, you can't just rip through the middle of a forest and go, oh yeah, if we stay 15 meters away, the koalas will be fine. And so I remember after I adopted a koala, I went and put some money into a little fund and adopted a koala to get it back to health. And I think this life is for me. So I started to transition. I moved back. I was working out of Newcastle at the time and moved back to Newcastle, tried to work here in the engineering field, but instead of in the consulting world, moving more into designing products. I was like hoping that I could design products that would benefit the engineering field, but even that was not enough for me. One night, I remember sitting down with my mom. I was crying at the time. I was like, Mom, I don't know what to do. I've listened to what you've said. I've ticked all the boxes. What do I do? And she's just travel. Just go away and travel. And really, funnily enough, permaculture was something I was really interested in. I'd spent a lot of time building aquarium systems. I'd spent a lot of time building terrariums, and I was like, those were my hobbies. And I was like, man, I want to learn more about nature. And so I pretty much booked a ticket, went to Central America, landed in the biggest permaculture center in Costa Rica, which is called Putamona. And there's actually a Netflix episode where Zac Efron goes there. So if you give that a Google, Zac Efron, Putamona, you can check out the permaculture center itself. And I met Stephen Brooks, I met Amanda Sage, I met Paul Stamets, I met all these like super influential humans like Penny Livingston and Sarah Wu. Like there's just a whole list of humans. And so I booked myself in for small workshops, for exchanges through this permaculture center while I worked there. And I just filled my cup with as much nature knowledge, nature connection, nature practices, regenerative processes, tried to completely flip and put myself back in the place of being a student again. And then did that for about 6 months. COVID hit, and I brought all that knowledge back and worked for myself for about 5 years under Urban Botanica Collective. And then really, I'm only back in the engineering field in the last kind of 8 months, mainly just because the economy is a bit shaky at the moment. And it's just a bit of stability, and I'm working in a good company, at the moment, I'm working as a hydraulic engineer. So when you flick your switch on your shower, the water comes through. When you push the button and your sewer water goes away, and we deal with all the infrastructure and the hydraulic engineering that deals with how those resources, because I'm not going to call it waste, they are resources, how they get managed and how they get utilized and how they get cleaned to be able to go back into the environment and continue the cycle again. So that's pretty much in a quick little, that's really the journey. And I can very much say that the biggest takeaway from me, I think the world is, we'd love to think that it's all magic and it's beautiful and there's honesty everywhere, but the honest truth is that's not true. And I found that when I was in nature was the only place that I knew, like, a tree wasn't growing because it wanted to show off. A tree was growing because it wanted to thrive and create like systems of exchange and resilience. And it was truth. Like, nature is truth. And nature very much is the basis and foundations of how I function on a day-to-day basis. It's the place I go to when I'm dysregulated. It's a place where I find a lot of peace. And I'm very much now like the mission of empowering, educating young people and people of older ages to partner with nature, I think is the one thing that when I say it and when I do those tasks, like, there's this enriching experience of self-worth, purpose. And I think that's, yeah, what you said at the beginning, how we're all really busy doing our things. When we take the time out to do these tasks and these little projects of ours, I think we really do create that local change for global change. And I think that's really what it's all about. It's about our little communities and these types of connections where we have these little hubs of knowledge and collaboration and discussion is where it all happens. This is where the magic happens. Yeah, excited to see what we talk about today.
Wow. Really epic story there. There's a few things I want to jump into, but I'm loving the conversation already, because I think the fact that you jumped into a very traditionally rewarding job or career pathway, engineer, it's going to bring in some money. It's a stable sort of setup. You're always going to find work. You're building things in the world, infrastructure, pipelines for water, gas, whatever it is. But then you had a moment where you had to second guess the objectives or even the means to the ends. And it was the koala bear and this asbestos being released into the atmosphere. And those moments, I think sometimes people either gloss over them and they blunt themselves to the pain of thinking about that and they just keep on at the job. And then there's other people who go, you know what? Stuff this pipeline. I'm going to figure out how to use these skills elsewhere. I think what you've done here is super valuable because you're someone who's accumulated these skills. You're somewhere between engineering and design. You're able to think a big picture. You've got the math, you've got the design, you're aware of these things at a higher level. Now you can bring that back to nature and reward nature with those skills. As where I see a lot of youngsters nowadays who maybe have a bent towards the environment. They care about nature right from the get-go. They might go hard into climate change science or environmental science or even like a journalism situation or an advocate or an activist. But your power to affect change due to your skills in engineering, mathematics, practical world things now makes you more impactful in a lot of ways. Not to say that people in those other camps can't become impactful, but I think people have thrown out a lot of those more traditional careers, say like an engineer, because it's associated with the woes of industry and the destruction of natural environments. But it's really also the same thing that can come around and back to nourish it. So what is your bigger picture for, you studied these things, you filled your cup, you went out there and you understood what it is that we need to turn the world around. Where do you see what you're doing now and where we need to progress in terms of what we're doing to the landscapes, how we're living? What's the bigger picture for what's the end game for these type of permaculture villages getting it out there from your perspective? I'd love to hear where you see all of this happening in 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting. I only got asked this the other day, and I was sitting down with some friends, and we were just all talking about that grand vision, like where do we see ourselves, and what's really alive in us right now about where we're heading. And I think a big part of that, when I was 20, I set a 2-year goal, a 5-year goal, and a 10-year goal. And so I'm 32 now. So it's been almost 12 years since I set those intentions to enter into a professional field. And I remember that 2-year check-in was like, how am I feeling? Am I in a place that feels like home? Do I feel safe? I remember at the 5-year, I said, I'm going to check in with myself. I don't like my work. I'm going to quit and I'm going to go do something else. So I also did that. And then I did my own thing for 5 years. And then now I've set another 10-year goal. And I think for me right now, engineering very much is like, it's a really fulfilling field, but it is a stepping stone for me. I think these times when we spend time to become the student, to do workshops, to upskill ourselves, to follow creative pursuits, to pick up hobbies, to spend time with people who are like-minded, to immerse ourselves in the things that foundationally enrich us. These are the things that are going to really give people purpose, and it gives me purpose. So I think the end goal for me really is that I will have a property, like people who are regenerating land. It's not about having this room that's a classroom. It's about having a space that's a classroom, because I can't teach nature in an environment where nature is not designed with. Like, I can't go into the middle of Sydney CBD and go, look at all the nature. Like, it's a complete disconnect. And it's really interesting that I know that because I've had so many young kids that have come through my space. Like, I've been running mycology walks for the last 4 years. We've had over 350-ish students. And like, I've had a massive mix of adults as well. And it's really interesting. Like, I got 60 traditionally educated high school, primary school students, and you can see the difference. The kids who were in the traditional system, like farmers' friends, like the little weed with the little clippy. Yep. So one of the girls had got like a few seeds on the dress, and she flipped out. She freaked out, and she's like crying, and she goes, I don't want to do this. I want to go home. I don't like because it scratched my skin. And she was really afraid of it. Little did she. And then I met her parents later, and it, like, no negativity to her or her family. They were raised in Balcombe Hills in Sydney, and you could see that they never really spent time in nature. And so this girl created this kind of little vortex where all the other kids started going, oh, yeah, oh, and there's like a leech over here, and oh, there's like this squishy thing over here. And it created this like really weird space. It's really hard to bring it back. Meanwhile, these Steiner kids rock up. They are like super introverted. They really struggle to have a lot of like direct conversation. Some of them are really good. But then as the day went on and you could see them interacting with the environment, you could see them starting to get excited about finding fungi. And we just went on this epic 2.5-hour walk together where everyone was like taking photos and they were studying, and they had these little booklets and they were writing everything down, and they were really genuinely engaged in learning and wanting to learn. They'll be like, what is this one? And I'm like, oh, does it have gills, or does it have a macrophage? Does it have an annulus? And they're like, oh, what's that one? I'm like, oh, go look at your workbook. And they were like trying to understand. They were keen. They had a curiosity about them. And then after the class was finished, you know what they did? Their parents said, go have a play in nature. And they're like, cool. And we go down like 5 minutes later, and they're building these natural mud dams. And then they're like, oh, this mud has a different consistency. Let's like try this mud over the other mud. And they were like fully in nature, integrating, learning through. And it's not even just a dam. Like, they're learning material science. They're learning water redirection. They're fully engaged in learning. And I think for me as well, like having a physical space where I can learn with my hands is like an absolute fundamental to education. It's cool having infographics. It's cool having the books. It's cool having these environments where we can sit down and really get into the technical aspect. But without the physical connection to a space, I think that is all lost. So really, this money that I'm accumulating will eventually progress into a big block of land where I can start practicing all the skill sets and developing a system. And this system is going to be integrated in permaculture. It's going to be rooted in a lot of modalities of Veda. So we're going to look at medicinal plants. We're going to look at how those interact with the body. We're going to be looking at, because I'm a hydraulic engineer, we're going to be pumping water and resources around, and we're going to be storing them and collecting them and creating resilience. We're going to be looking at the natural landscape and seeing what it needs, do soil testing, look where you need your pioneer species, see where the forest is at. And I really want to regenerate the land, because without a doubt, like, there's not many places now that are next to a fresh running water stream. And it's year by year, it's becoming less and less easy to find land like that. So really, I think for me, it's about just getting my financials sorted, getting a big block of land and generating a space where we can learn how to interact with nature and learn from it and partner with it. Because at the end of the day, we've got all these problems, but you look at nature, like if we use Roundup and it ends up in the ocean, what happens? There's an algae bloom. The algae bloom naturally gets rid of all the heavy metals out of the water, and then it disintegrates and then becomes food for something. Like, if we partner with nature, then we're actually going to have all the tools that we need to fix the planet. And it's so funny, because I've also met a lot of people that, like you're saying, that just jump straight into a field where they haven't got real life experience of seeing how things actually work. They're disconnected from that, and they have the big vision, but sometimes that route of trying to make change, you just don't have the foundations or the network or the connections, because you can't do it alone as well. It's very much about finding that balance, and the only way you can find that balance is by doing and joining the discussion and making sure that you're engaged in your community in a way that you're thinking about not how can I get as much money as I can. It's like, how can I best serve the people that are around me? And by generating the viewpoint of serving and offering, I think, the exchange naturally happens. Really big vision, big property, have a learning space. But in between all that, I'm still running workshops. I'm still doing like fungi, like nature walks, where we actually can learn about fungi. We can learn about topsoil. We can learn about trees. We can learn about the regenerative systems that exist in nature. And still doing the biophilic design. So just recently as well, like, I just installed a moss wall in a kindergarten space, in brand new one in Newcastle, called Explore and Develop is the name of the company, if you want to suss it out. And so it's also about bringing nature. So there's people in suburbia that just can't escape it. That's just their life. So I have to learn how to actually bring nature in there. So I'm making these little hubs in suburbia where I'm like placing these little strategic moments for someone to stop in their day. Like you were saying, you can just gloss over it, but some people in a moment, if you just give them 20 seconds to just lock in on a thing and go, oh, how cool is this thing? Who is this person that made this thing? You end up finding your people, and you also end up just making someone's life a little bit more connected. And the reason why is because nature is us, like, and it's natural that humans feel a connection to nature. It's the one thing that we all, I think, between nature and sport, those are probably the two things that everyone on the planet can get around, you know?
Really well said. Universal languages. You can appreciate the wind coming through a tree, or the sound of a river, or a bird call, whether you're young or whether you're old. Just as you can appreciate a high-level athlete doing their thing.
Now, for those of you who don't know, Life Rocks is not just a podcast. It is an education foundation centered around connecting children to the magic of nature through earth sciences. As a self-funded foundation and startup, we are constantly seeking support so that we can continue our great work. So if you feel called to donate to Life Rocks, please head down to the show notes and find the relevant donation link. We accept regular money as well as cryptocurrencies. We greatly appreciate you, our Life Rocks community. Now, back to the show.
But you've traveled, you've explored to fill your cup, you've understood things at different levels, and you've absorbed some of the greatest minds and even been around them who are thinking deeply about nature and how do we not only solve some of the problems of disconnection, but just create beautiful spaces and create beautiful things. Tell us about some of your experiences where you have seen some of this stuff in action and you thought, this is how you do it. This is how it's done.
Oh man, there's so many moments. I think probably the best thing is to maybe just get out of the macro and go into the micro. We can zoom in on something specifically.
Sure.
I would probably say for me, yeah, I'm known as the fun guy. Sometimes people don't even call me Monty. They're like, oh, the fun guy. I very much feel my research into the fungi kingdoms, the whole species, has been such a journey. And the deeper I dig, the more I find answers to all the questions that we ever needed. And also having people that are influential, like Paul Stamets and all his team and all the amazing myco-based tech that they constantly are going through. I think that for me is probably one of the most epic kind of it's actually a massive part of the world, but I think that's where I've found so much gold. So I think I did a 1 week immersion mycology course for the company called Ecology Academy. And we went through and learnt all about mushrooms. Like we went into culturing, we went into substratas, how they eat them, what substratas, how you process them for to be eaten. We learned about medicinal mushrooms. We generated a jungle lab, which essentially is just a bunch of storage containers, some isotropic alcohol, and some very clean utensils. Like we don't need this big lab in the middle of the jungle. Like it was super low tech. And I think that's a misconception as well, that we need this heaps of money and we need heaps of things to make nature. Man, it's been doing it for billions of years, man. It can grow, it can handle a little bit of bacterium and a little bit of mold here and there. So that was really cool. And where I saw that really happen was we would learn about mushrooms and then we'd go into the jungle and then see what mushrooms we found. And there was just the more and more that I looked around, the more I'm they're actually everywhere. Every 2 meters, there was another species. And I just thought, wow, there's this species and their entire part of the food web is here's life. And then it channels. It's just think about a triangle. So at the height and it's pointing down. It's a triangle pointing down. And it's all channeling down to the tip, the very bottom of the triangle. And that is where something is dead. That is when something its life force has flipped and it's gone and it's just sitting there. Fungi rock up, and from that point, it turns it back into life. It becomes a resource again for trees, for the topsoil to regenerate, insects. There's springtails, isopods, you got worms, you got flatworms, you got beetles, you got mites, you got all these things. And then the birds come and then the birds poop and then they have seeds. And so I'm it's this beautiful cycle of life. It's for me, I think a lot of us are I don't know what to do. I feel a lot of people feel really anxious about the state of the world. And you could just listen to mainstream media. You could go in and you could investigate on all these horrible things that are happening across the world. But then also you could put your focus and attention into, okay, cool. If those are problems. What are the solutions? And so becoming a solutions-based human. Okay, there's a problem. And I think this is the engineering mentality, really. This is, okay, there's a problem. We're going to need a solution. How do we do it? And I think mushrooms, like you look at them digesting plastics, you look at them cleaning up oil spills, you look at them like they've been incorporating them into like sediment sausages. I don't know if people know what sediment sausages are. Essentially, those are the big fibrous mesh kind of noodles that they put around construction sites. So when the soil flows down, it captures them. So they've actually been putting mushrooms in there. And because mushrooms are essentially 90% water, they absorb all the water. So they're micro-filtering all the resources that are coming through this top overflow of the water. And so you're also like stacking functions, right? So it's also about, okay, nature's actually really complex, but also incredibly simple at the same time. And so I found that, fungi, this partnership with fungi, and also knowing that they actually do have the closest DNA to almost anything we have on this planet. Like they're this species that we've formed from. They're probably one of our closest ancestors, even though they look nothing like us. So when we meet something that has genetic coding that's really similar to us, it takes a little bit of curiosity to go, what can I learn from these amazing species of little gelatinous, wiggly little things? And I think this is only just the beginning. Like, to be teaching people about fungi, to making them not be afraid of them, like for them to look at a mushroom and have a bit of wonder and not be like, oh, that thing looks scary because it's red. I think that's a really big step, because all that stuff I learned from overseas, I pretty much went, okay, this stuff is literally life-changing. And it literally brought me back to feeling grounded and feeling connected and having a purpose and a direction. I need to bring this back to Australia. And Australia very much is this mixing pot of lots of different cultures, lots of different generations. So it's about actually bringing that culture back and the teachings back to the east coast of Australia and further, and trying to be able to weave that into other people's lives, people who have an interest in it. And I think as well, just growing some fungi, like just getting a grow kit and just observing them do their thing. It's probably one of the beautiful wonders of life, like watching it go from a hypha, which is just a single nodule of mycelium, to strands of mycelium, to this clump of like white mass, into your primordia, which is it's that little baby head of a mushroom, from the primordia to the actual cap, and watch that whole process and journey unfold. If that doesn't generate some wonder and some real like interesting curiosity, I'm like, I don't know what will.
I got nothing left for you, son.
100%.
So tell me, you're taking kids out into the forest to look for fungi. What are some of the things that you're introducing them to on this trip? What are you making them aware of? Tell us how these trips unfold, because we've done a couple in Life Rocks and they've always been a ripper time. Kids go nuts for mushrooms. I go nuts for mushrooms. You're obviously nuts for mushrooms. So tell us what you do out there.
So when we run, I'm just going to pull up real quick. I could do it off the top of my head, but let's pull up this medicinal mushroom fact sheet. So number one, like the biggest part of any workshop that I run is you're taking time and energy out of your life, and I'm fully facilitating this space. And all I want anyone to do is feel safe and have fun. Like at an absolute, like I love to celebrate life. I love to have fun, and I love to share that with other humans. So it's all about also bringing people together that are like-minded. Once you have all the people who are like-minded, they feel safe, they're excited, they're like ready for a fun day, everyone just bounces off each other. Like number one, we learn how to actually find mushrooms. So we find it, we go, here's all the different species. So you got your mycorrhizal, you got your saprophytic, you got your parasitic, we got all our little genus rooting off. And then we go, all right, here, let's go find examples of them. And so we'll go find mycorrhizal fungi and I'll start explaining the anatomy. So we start taking photos and trying to understand what it is that we're looking at. So if we're looking at gills versus a macrophage, if it has that little, like if you think of the classic Mario Brothers mushroom, the Amanita muscari, which everyone seems to know about these days, which is awesome. It has that little skirt on halfway down the stem. That's called the annulus. And that used to be connected to the cap. So it's like you start breaking down, we get a knife, we chop down the center and we look at the cross-sectional profile of it. We look at the colors, we smell the mushrooms. We fully start to break down the processes. And then I also am a massive fan of iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is an app where you can off-grid, like you can just take photos. And then once you're back on the grid, you can catalog all the photos of that species, put it into a little like kind of study little resource, and it will scan, it will AI scan all the images, and it will at least generally give you a genus, which is a great beginning point, because you can start going, okay, this is a mushroom. It's got a stem and it's got a cap. Cool. It looks like literally every other mushroom on the planet. At least it gives you this starting point to actually start understanding what you're looking at and trying to actually really understand what it is. And so after a while, you can start going, okay, here's actually some edible fungi. So we've also found like just buckets and buckets of edible fungi, depending on the day. Like some days we'll have tables of edible fungi that everyone can take home and eat. Imagine getting a free meal in this economy, going to Woolworths and buying food. Imagine going out into nature and just walking up to a bit of grass and going, here's my lunch. Edible fungi, that gets people really excited. And saffron milk caps generally are what we end up eating. And the only way I can explain that is it's like a marinara sauce. It's so weird. But butter and a saffron milk cap, you really can't beat that out in the forest. So I take my ute out, I take cooked plates, and we all eat whatever we find that's edible. And then also I make a 7 mushroom medicinal soup. And we just sit down and we eat together after as well. So those have been happening for about 4 years. And I think they're only gonna the grand vision for that is to actually make mushroom tours. Like a big part of Costa Rica is I booked myself into the most insane tour guided things. Like I went for a jungle nighttime tour. Like you're literally walking through this dense jungle and they're like, so just so you know, there's like vipers in the trees and there's tarantulas. It's actually really dangerous. So just be mindful. And I'm like, literally, I remember the first time, like I was out in the jungle, my nervous system was like, okay, you got to be careful. And if something touches your hair on your leg or on your arm, you just go, whoa, like you freak out. And I remember like initially the first 2 times they were just like grasshoppers or whatever. But I remember late at night, this thing jumped on me. And I've just gone like a Bruce Wayne, like karate chop this thing off my leg. And I watched this little baby frog fly away. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. Like it was so sad. And then after that moment, I was like, every time something landed on me, I'd take like half a second to just look at it. And then if I didn't want it on me, I'd slap it away. But yeah, it was a great learning in this unconditioned part of your brain that's I need to get it off me. It's because I hurt this little baby frog and I could never forgive myself. So yeah, I think as well, like just bringing it back, I think fungi it's a massive interest of mine, and I've also run medicinal mushroom workshops. So health is a really big part, like nature-based health, and not relying on pharmaceuticals as someone who I love my mum, but we had a lot of pharmaceuticals growing up as kids. We were quite susceptible. We had hay fever and asthma and stuff. So got a lot of respiratory based things. And so, also just tapping into medicinal compounds and like plant science and learning about beta glucans and terpenoids and ergothioneine, like one of my favorite compounds, which I might just like real quickly if we got the time,
Yeah.
So 7% of our daily energy is used to use ergothioneine to produce glutathione. And so
Mhm.
if we've got a compound that we can eat from mushrooms that gives us that resource, so our body has this reservoir of energy that they can tap into, isn't that just epic? And it's interesting that it comes from a mushroom because they are like quite fleshy and human-like in a lot of ways. And I'm all about, yeah, getting back to homeostasis and just giving our body what we need and letting the natural systems that make us human, the skeleton, the tissues, the tendons, the ligaments, the lymphatic system, the kidneys, all the organs just do what they need to do. So I think there's also that whole branch of mushrooms, which I've been running medicinal mushroom workshops for also probably about 4 or 5 years, going to music festivals like Dragon Dreaming. I've been to so many. I've probably run a medicinal mushroom workshop maybe 3 or 4 times at festivals. So it's a great way to share that knowledge because a lot of people do, like, we take our body for granted. But yeah, some people are dealing with diseases and health problems. And so giving people access to compounds that are natural and designed for our body, I think is also like health, human health. What's the point of having money and resources and stuff if you're dead, you know? So,
Oh, yeah. And what's the origins of pharmacology? It's all the medicines from the jungle. It's all of the plants. It's all of the fungi. Penicillin came from mold. We've
yeah,
synthesized vitamin C from ascorbic acid. Aspirin comes from willow bark and on. And I think the missionaries of the Western world sent all of their people into the jungles to find this stuff and then have turned it into the medicines, the opiates, all of the things that the foundations of modern pharmacology are built on have come from the earth. So it's no big revelation here, but it is a step back towards a more natural way if you can understand these plants, remove a bit of the fear, and yeah, develop a healthy relationship with them. And especially as kids, once I started to learn about, oh, fungi is connected to the roots of trees and it's living inside of our guts and it's in the air and it's here to break things down. And like all of these little nuanced tidbits that you collect does connect you to a sense of wonder and it does connect you to a sense of being a part of an ecosystem. But if you've only got the tidbits that you ever hear is, oh yeah, like those mushrooms are toxic and people die from mushrooms every year and mold grows in your house, that's not very exciting and it's not going to
yeah,
engage
absolutely.
students.
Yeah, 100%. And it's that is really bringing us back to the beginning of the podcast about what we were talking about, how if we understand nature, we innately will appreciate it more. And that's a classic David Attenborough perspective.
Yeah,
But it's so true, like so true. And at an absolute grassroots level, it just makes so much sense that if the human mind understands something, like just imagine pottery. Like if we just had some clay, oh, cool, there's some clay. But if we don't have a wheel and the process and the techniques to be able to shape that clay, we'll
just
never
mud.
be able to make anything cool out of it. So imagine having this literal resource on the planet that is infinite and forever expanding and forever, like it's never done. Every day we find out something new and you're never going to be able to learn about everything on the planet. So it's about finding that archetypal, that those archetypes of nature that you innately get excited about. Like for me, it's a really great question. A great question for the listening audience is, next time you're out in nature, like take a journal. If you do have one, if you don't have one, take one out there. And when you're going for a walk, just don't think about it too much, but think about the things that attract you to certain things. Like for me, my archetypes of nature are moss, ferns, epiphytes, and fungi. Like those 5 things, I will stop at every single one of them. I'm the slowest walker in nature. If you ever go on a hike with me, expect we're not going from A to B. We're going to A, B, Z, D, M, N, O, P. Like we're going everywhere because wherever I see interest and a beautiful moment in nature for me to absorb, I think that is the first steps to really understanding subconsciously what things you're really like connected to, and remembering as well, especially as someone who's from a very technical field, it's, man, this stuff is like the magic on the world. Yeah, this, we can try and explain it through science and maths and chemistry and atoms and astrology and stuff, but also you can just look at it and go, man, that's magic. Man, look at that orchid flower like just pop out of that plant, and look at that bee getting in amongst that pollen. Like, how cool is that? It's like that, for me, that's probably been the biggest lessons, is disconnecting from the mind and just going, man, like there is magic on this planet and it's just everywhere to tap into, for sure.
Very well said. I 100% resonate with that belief that nature is the original magic, and even though we try to penetrate it with our science and get to the bottom of things and map everything out, it is the unlimited, it is the infinite playground. We'll only get so far before we have to sit back for a moment and enjoy and surrender to the infinite beauty and mystery that surrounds us all the time. That nature is this laboratory, that's the original laboratory, it's the original classroom. And yeah, I'm so happy that you're out there doing what you're doing and keen to set up a classroom, a living classroom on a property that is an example of all of the different things that we can focus our positive attention on. Because they say that 8 out of 10 children have daily anxiety about the state of the environment. Okay, we push a lot of messaging around climate change, global warming, pollution, plastics in the ocean, and it goes on and on. But there are solutions out there for not participating in this, not doing it like that, and feel like you're only one family or one little unit of people. But isn't it really up to us how we express ourselves in this life, and what it is that we will and won't live for? So yeah, I think today has been a beautiful discussion around take a step, just do something that you feel called to do, and listen to that voice that taps on the shoulder and says, hey, do I want to be ripping up this koala's habitat? I just spent a bit of time with Peter Andrews, who's a regenerative agriculturist. He lives 45 minutes away from Mittagong, and some of the ways in which he manages water is just absolutely impressive. And his understanding of how we could, instead of going out into the bush and ripping up invasive species of plants, like so-called invasive species of plants, like plants haven't invaded the whole planet on the wind and on birds all the time anyway, but instead of doing that kind of bush regen attitude, which is just an idea that's been extrapolated out by an agency and is now repeated because it's like the thing. How about we went and dug trenches along contour lines to slow the movement of water, which then slows the release of nutrients, which then can hold water in a landscape, which then regenerates the landscape, which then changes the plants through time. So you might have a successive species, but as the nutrient builds up in an area, it fades away, and other bigger, more nutritious, more edible species arrive later on, all through managing water, managing sunlight, which he would say are the two most destructive forces, but also the two most creative forces. So if we can harness these types of things, and I think all of that sort of knowledge always blows my socks off, because it just shows that here's someone who's just sat back and observed and observed and observed and observed. And they haven't done all these hasty actions. Oh, we're so smart, we've got the bottle of glyphosate, or we're so smart, like this species wasn't on the Australian continent like 250 years ago, so we got to get rid of it. Like, so short-sighted.
Yeah, and it's awesome to also note that permaculture was, it's over 50 years old, that your whole modality, and it has grassroots in here in Australia. So it's really cool to now have those alternate modalities where, because I think we just became really heavily reliant on agencies and on the government to be providing the solutions for us. But at the end of the day, the power is in our hands. The power is you going out to your backyard and testing things, to go down to the local ecosystems and just trialing things and observing them. Yeah. Number one, principle of permaculture: observe and then interact.
There you go.
It's literally the first principle. This disconnect through just, let's just put our vision, like, we're humans, let me just fix this thing, and then, oh crap, now we've created like 3 other problems. Like, it's like it constantly happens all the time. It happens on a day-to-day basis. And I love that you've brought it back to our beginnings, which is water and sun are really just, God, like they create so much, but a fire can just destroy everything so quickly. So we've got a journey ahead of us, but I'm really excited about the future, and I'm really excited about what this next generation is going to do, because I think meeting kids these days, it's really genuinely so enriching to see how some of them are seeing the world and how they're not getting caught up in stuff. Also, kids out there are just so incredibly smart. I'm really excited to set them up so that when they're my age, that they just have good foundations, good values, good beliefs, and a great connection to nature, and use that to problem solve their things. Yeah, it's been an epic day of discussion. I feel like I hope to meet you in person, because we feel like we've just skimmed that surface, and there's probably heaps more conversations that, especially if Ella was here as well, I think we would just we'd talk for hours.
We've got big things coming, and no doubt we'll both be championing nature and childhood and development and health for all of humanity until we take our very last breath. So it's been an absolute pleasure. I can't wait to see what else you've got coming out. If anyone is in Newcastle or up around that way, get in touch with Monty, go on a fungi walk, support what he's doing, because it is super awesome. And even get him to come and talk about your landscape, talk about design, install a moss wall in your classroom, because all of these sort of things do contribute to our life and the lives of our children. Monty, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Asher, and thank you all for joining me on the discussion as well. I hope to meet you all in the future at some point.
All the Life Rocks listeners out there, thanks so much for watching. You can find Monty in all of the descriptions in the links below. And until then, keep your life rocking and keep on connecting. Ciao.
Thank you so much for listening to the Life Rocks podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then leave us a review. We'll be back soon with more inspiring content, and in the meantime, remember, life rocks.